a ton of rumors swirling around about Najee Harris and a potential firework accident this week, and it turns out some of those were true, and it could have a major effect on the Chargers' rushing attack.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 10 seasons, but this is our 8th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to all the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Daniel, I thought there was absolutely no way that this was a real story, a real situation. It had to be a fabrication. Lo and behold, it absolutely was not. Najee Harris was involved in a firework accident that resulted into a superficial eye injury. What is that going to do for his prospects for the start of this 2025 season? We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to get into the players with the most to prove going into training camp. Guys like Quentin Johnston, obviously heading into year 3. This is a big season. Some may say it's make or break. Zion Johnson transitioning to center. How's that going to go? And then Junior Coulson, after a down rookie season, this is a big one for him to see if he can break out.
There's a lot of players with a lot to prove, and for some guys, it's like, hey, if it's doing and happening like this again, like you might not get another crack at it in 2026. But this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. David, this was a buy or sell. This was an overreaction. This is something we both sold on Wednesday's show, and something maybe we should have bought a little bit more. Obviously, I thought it was weird, and we kind of laid out what the facts of it were on Wednesday as far as there being a firework accident in Najee Harris's hometown, but no actual real reporting on it. Well, the real reporting came out in droves on Thursday, and this is a statement that was let out by Doug Hendrickson before any of the big news scoopers could actually get anything out. He said Najee Harris was present at a 4th of July event where a fireworks mishap resulted in injuries to several attendees. Najee sustained a superficial eye injury during the incident, but is fully expected to be ready for the upcoming NFL season. Let's start with this, the obvious. Dumb. Just so dumb. Like, it's crazy to me that players still find themselves in these situations where you have illegal fireworks, according to reports, industrial strength fireworks, according to reports, in an area that you're not actually legally allowed to set them off, and something bad happens. You do things, you add up all 3 of those things, yeah, something bad is going to happen. Now, good news that he's expected to play this season, David, obviously, but like you see this and you're like, man, like so dumb, like stupid that this happened, but also like feels like a big bullet or firework was dodged in this case.
Yeah, I just don't understand how NFL players put themselves in these type of situations when, to me, it seems like they're completely avoidable. Like, you know how important you are and what these things can do. And I brought it up when we talked about it on Wednesday. There's a gigantic example of how bad it can go with Jason Pierre-Paul basically missing part of his hand because of a firework accident. Now, we don't know all of the details of exactly what happened with the situation, so not going to cast any blame other than the fact that you shouldn't be putting yourselves in these types of situations where these type of results can occur. So it's just one of those things, like, you got to know how to control what you can control and the situations and the environments that you're in and the people that you are around. When we're talking about fireworks, you know, this is something that can go horribly wrong, not just with Jason Pierre-Paul. We've seen it with numerous examples throughout the world, throughout the history of time. This is something that can cause major damage, and thankfully, according to the reports, it's just a superficial eye injury, and it should not at least threaten his career, which it absolutely could have.
Absolutely, it could have. And this is the thing, like, superficial eye injury makes it seem better, but it also kind of feels like we don't know everything yet, man. Like, And when it took so long for everything to actually come out, and honestly, shout out to the Chargers sleuths and the, small accounts that had it right to an extent from the get-go. I mean, it sounds like he still has his eyeball, right? Because if you're saying superficial, that's at least something I feel safe saying, is that he still has both of his eyes intact. At the same time, like, there's no picture of him. There's no, real kind of reports. The Chargers declined to comment reportedly as well on it.
No surprise there.
And man, this is a dude who has a lot of money. Like, he didn't have crazy prospects in free agency. He signed quickly, but it wasn't a multi-year deal. It wasn't a, double digits and millions kind of a deal. We're going to talk about guys with a lot to prove, man. He has something to prove, and a first round running back that's going to be nipping at his heels. But like this, even though you're saying expects to start the season, man, we're like a month and a half out, a month and a week out from this season.
I mean, the Chargers are playing a football game at the end of the month, Daniel.
Yeah, man. Like, and it's just like that training camp time could be important too, because this is his first year in this offense. So great to know he'll be back for this season, but like, how long is this superficial injury going to keep him out?
Yeah, that's a huge question mark. And we saw last year what happened with Justin Herbert, right? With his injury and how much that affected him in the beginning of his season. Like, you just don't know. And, Justin obviously is a supercomputer, so that's a little bit of a different situation. But with Najee, as you pointed out, this is a completely new situation, a new team, a new offense. All of these things, all of these elements require you to be on the field as much as possible so you can drill it and drill it and drill it and make sure that you have that muscle memory programmed. The more time that you miss, the more detrimental it's going to be to your ability to pick up this offense and go out there and execute it immediately.
Well, we lost David. His internet went out mid-show, so it's going to be me taking over for the rest of it here. But glad he got to give his thoughts on Najee Harris. I mean, just what a crazy story that we're talking about. And if you don't think the Chargers curse is real, this whole incident happened on Spano Street, which I think says a lot, and I mean, makes a lot of sense as Chargers fans know. Something that is seemingly happened to them, weird stuff, crazy stuff all the time. But I think the next big question is kind of what this means for Omarion Hampton, because even though this is something that is outside of football, we have to look at the football perspective of this. And I think with Najee Harris having this happen, for his agent, who obviously isn't going to want to raise more alarm than is necessary, saying that he'll be ready for the season, that's just a very specific type of message that it's sending, which means he is going to miss some time, just not enough time to have him miss games. But I think for Omarion Hampton, what this just means is an opportunity, potentially an opportunity to cut into that whatever share was going to be between him and Najee Harris, and potentially take that job over sooner rather than later, maybe even going into week one as the main bell cow back, which may have happened either way. There's a lot of reasons to believe, because of the explosiveness that he brings to the table, because of just the prospects of what he could be and what his ceiling is, that he will take over. But it did feel like it might be a more gradual thing with a team that really loves Najee Harris, a guy in Najee Harris that Jim Harbaugh has been recruiting since, his high school days, basically, and kind of always wanted him on the team. A guy that the Chargers went and picked up on the first day of free agency, which I think tells you how much they think of him. But with all of those things, it's also, he has to be there. He has to prove that he should get those carries. He has to not be an obvious kind of disadvantage to you outside of playing someone like Omarion Hampton, who might bring those other things to the table. So one accident could mean something beneficial for a rookie like Omarion Hampton, who is looking to kind of earn that role, and he'll still have to, and hopefully he's always cracked up to be, because man, this rushing attack with Najee Harris and Omarion Hampton, two big physical backs that can hurt you multiple ways in the passing game and the running game, felt really good compared to what the Chargers have had in that backfield as far as running a traditional run game and fixing what has been such a weakness for this team. It's hard for this not to impact how you feel about that a little bit, not knowing necessarily what Najee Harris's availability is going to be, how late he's going to be picking up this offense. He is a veteran. It is still a new offense. So maybe an opportunity for Omarion Hampton, but a bad thing for the Chargers running game overall, or at least something that's going to have to work itself out during training camp whenever Najee Harris can get out there. But we did want to get into the guys with the most to prove heading into training camp, because it's a big camp for several players. So we're getting into all that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. And it's great to have access to all of those things in one app. It's so easy to overlook things when you have to try to track it in multiple places. And for someone who's married, I love the collaborative parts of this and the ability for both me and my wife to truly kind of sync up our finances and know exactly what's going on at all times, especially when you have a baby. It's even more important, but something also I wished I had when I was younger to keep my finances more in order. But take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. Well, I want to get into some of the players who have the most to prove going into the Chargers' first training camp, which opens up Thursday of this upcoming week. I can't believe it's already so close. I'm very excited because it does feel like this is a better Chargers team going into 2025, and we'll get a good look at some of these rookies. And when you have the rookie draft class that Joe Ortiz had last year in 2024, man, it feels like the sky's the limit for these rookies. Even, the 5th round picks like a Canard and a Tarheeb still last year. Maybe you get some big contributions from someone like an Oronde Gadsden or a Keandre Lambert-Smith. But this is more, I think, about players who have the most to prove, who have either already been on the team or maybe, in some cases, I'll talk about a couple rookies on the defensive side of things here that are trying to kind of eat into veteran snaps and get on the field in that way. But one of the players who had the most to prove last year is still one of the players that has the most to prove this year, and it's Quentin Johnston. And I just don't know how you can look at Quentin with what is around him now and not think that even another step is necessary. Now, let's give credit where credit is due. Quentin Johnston improved so much from his rookie year to his second year that you feel like, hey, this is a usable player now. Maybe not a first round quality type of player. Maybe he never kind of cashes in on what his draft status was. But this is a usable guy. I mean, you look at that Raiders game, 14 catches, 186 yards, and you're like, man, I didn't know he had that in him. And there was a lot of times when he thought that last year, especially putting up 8 touchdowns, which is hard to do in general, but especially for Quentin Johnston, who's not known as a jump ball guy, not necessarily known as a red zone threat. And he was able to do a lot of those things last year. Now, still very obvious holes in his game that showed up in Baltimore last year. Showed up in the biggest game of the season against the Texans, 5 targets, 0 catches, including a target on 4th down, which was a dumb play call to go to him against Derek Stingley in that moment, one of the best corners in the league. But still, he has to show that he can cover up some of even more of those weaknesses. I think that he will always be a weapon. If you know how to use him, he will be a weapon for you. But I think what he's trying to prove this year is, hey, no, I'm an all the time kind of a 3-down receiver, for lack of a better term for it. Like, I shouldn't be taken off the field, even though now you've brought in a bunch of competition. I think the Chargers want Quentin Johnston to be great. Let me say that first. What I also think, though, is that I do think that the Chargers want Quentin Johnston to be great. I think they saw a lot of the improvements. You've heard Sanjay Law talk about it, but at the same time, with the moves that they made, adding a Mike Williams, adding a Trey Harris in the second round, going 2 wide receivers in the first 5 rounds, they're not putting all their eggs in the Quentin Johnston basket anymore, and he wasn't their draft pick, but I still think he will be a decently big part of the offense. But I think that role, how big of a role he has in this offense, is going to be how he performs during this training camp and showing, hey, I am a much more well-rounded receiver. I can beat man-to-man coverage. I'm not an obvious liability like seemingly every weapon outside of Ladd McConkey was in that Houston Texans game. He's just the most high profile of them. But he is not the only one that has a lot to prove. And let's talk about a guy that literally has to prove he can play a position, and that is Zion Johnson, who has to prove that he can be the starting center for this team. He's in a competition, and we'll talk about camp battles at the start of next week, offense and defense. But not many of them are going to be like this, where you have a guy that's playing a brand new position, and in the words of Jim Harbaugh, you're hoping that competition between him and Bradley Bozeman is settled 8 to 10 days into camp. There's only so many padded practices. He has a ton to prove. I mean, not just, showing or for the Chargers prospects this year, but like he might have the most zeros of anyone to prove during this training camp because centers aren't paid as high as guards. But like, what would Zion Johnson, if he played left guard again this year and he made it to free agency in 2026, what would he be making if he had the end of the season in just the overall kind of body of his career to this point? What would he make on the open market? I don't think it would be top of the line. And I think that if he can go out there and prove, hey, center was the right position for me all along, this does kind of elevate all of my best attributes. He has a lot of money at stake for that. I mean, we know that Jim Harbaugh named him in the Chargers Elite 10 training players. They always have the most complimentary things to say about him, but he has to be better. And I think this is the big hope, is that he can be a center. So that way you're not running out him at left guard again and Bradley Bozeman at center, even with the addition of Mekhi Becton. Having those two together last year was a problem. The best case scenario is Zion Johnson's a great center, but you're still going to have those two dudes right next to each other, because it does feel like if Zion Johnson wins the center battle, Bradley Bozeman goes to left guard. If he can't play center and they figure that out, it's just back to Bradley Bozeman playing center and Zion Johnson being left guard, which Zion Johnson hasn't lived up to his first round status. If you're a first round guard, you're expected to be a top 10 guard at your position at some point. That's just what it is when you take that specific position in the first round. He's been okay, but in big moments, in big games, he hasn't shown up. And that's the most frustrating thing about Zion Johnson, has always been like, man, he'll look great for 80, 90% of a game. And there's just a handful of plays where he has these quick losses that affect drives, that affect the outcomes of games. He is solid, but the tandem of him and Bradley Bozeman was really hard to watch last year and just wasn't where it needed to be. Zion Johnson has a ton to prove going into this. And at the very least, you hope, if it doesn't work out at center, maybe trying to learn the center position, knowing what the guy next to him is being asked to do, can help him in a way as far as picking up blitzes, knowing what to alert, knowing all of these things that come along with being a center, but not necessarily being a guard. And then even if he is back at guard, maybe that is something that opens his eyes a little bit, that helps his awareness a little bit, that helps him key in on who's blitzing and things like that, because the Chargers were just confused and bamboozled every single time it felt like somebody threw a stunt or a twist at them or any kind of mildly exotic blitz. They weren't ready for it, and there was a free rusher going after Justin Herbert. So Zion Johnson and how he performs during this training camp, that could change that, hopefully, if it works out for him at center. But obviously, as we always have been, we're pretty skeptical that it's going to work out like that at a brand new position for him. But the last one I'll throw in here offensively, because we will get into training camp battles, I think these are a little bit different than that, is Kamani Vidal. And we've seen it with other Chargers day 3 running backs. He's trying to avoid being on the list of guys like Isaiah Spiller and Larry Roundtree and Josh Kelly, guys the Chargers hoped they could find a diamond in the rough late in the draft and ended up just never really panning out or turning into anything. We saw a little bit of Kamani Vidal last year. We've heard Greg Roman say this year that he has an extra gear in his game. That's going to be great. But now he has an undrafted rookie nipping at his heels. There's a first-round running back in the mix, so any prospect that he might have had, hey, as a 6th-round rookie, I'm going to eventually take over this role, that has to be put on pause. But right now, you're just fighting for your job potentially, and he'll be in the camp battles next week too. But he just has a lot to prove. You don't want to fade into the ether. If you're the running back with the 3rd most carries in a Greg Roman offense, and we'll see what happens with Najee Harris as well, that's already a pretty small role. You're going to have to really make the most out of the carries that you get and the touches that you get when you get them to earn more of them. Pass protection is going to be a huge thing for him, something he's pretty good at college, but it does smack a lot of running backs in the face, no pun intended, once you get to that NFL level. And he had a couple of really bad moments in pass pro last year, and that is one thing that is going to make coaches want to get you off the field immediately. That has to be something better. But maybe this, Najee Harris is a silver lining for someone like a Kamani Vidal as well. But I do think with potentially more opportunities, with the first team, if Najee Harris isn't out there, but the preseason games in particular, he should get a lot of run, and he has to make the most of it, because once the season goes, you can show what you can do in practice, but you're not actually getting those live bullets that even in the preseason, even against lesser competition, you were getting. Running in this offense with live bullets, with people fully tackling you, will be such huge experience for Kamani Vidal. And him making the team potentially, what his role on the offense is for sure, is going to be impacted on what he can prove in training camp and what he can prove once the preseason games start. But there are some guys on the defensive side I want to talk about as well, including Junior Coulson, who might be the player on defense who has the most to prove going into 2025 with what he can do at training camp. So we're going to get all of that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Well, we talked about the guys who have the most to prove on offense, and we just named a few of them. There are a ton of guys that have a lot to prove offensively, but I do want to talk about the defensive side, especially one guy in Junior Coulson who has a starting job. That's his to take, and that's why he has so much to prove. But thank you so much, as always, to the everydayers out there, especially those for making us your first listen today and for hanging out with me, even after David's internet totally crashed out on him. I appreciate you guys sticking along for the ride. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show with our guy Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino, as they get you up to date with everything going on around the league and keep you the most informed NFL fan this offseason on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. Let's start with Junior Coulson here. I don't know where else you would start on the defense if you weren't starting with someone like him, who obviously has such a clear path to a starting role if he can take advantage of it. And it starts with him with health. Let's go back to last year. Appendicitis, where he had to get an appendectomy early in the offseason, missed time, got nicked up during training camp, missed time, and then had a stint on IR. You add all those things together, it was always going to be a rougher season for Junior Coulson, but man, he was a step behind his whole rookie season. As Chargers fans, we've seen this before. Kenneth Murray, to an extent, I mean, sometimes it never clicks. Drew Tranquill, year 3, year 4 is when he took off, because your White had to wait in the wings for a while before he actually kind of took off and was a pretty good linebacker for them. The transition from college linebacker to NFL linebacker isn't easy. It's one of the hardest transitions to make. And Junior Coulson is a great example of that, because even though he missed time, he got to keep his defensive coordinator, which never happens. And Jesse Minter changed things up a little bit from what they did at Michigan, but you don't ever get to bring your defensive coordinator with you, so to speak, or have your defensive coordinator from the collegiate ranks draft you and know kind of exactly what they want your role to be for the most part in this offense. They know that Junior Coulson, like he was at Michigan, can be a game-wrecking player and play within the confines of this offense and be where he was supposed to be. But it maybe felt like there was a little too much thought. I know the coaches have made comments about how much work he's putting in. They seem like they are happy with the progress that he's made, but no one's really been super committed to being like, oh, hey, he's ready now. He wasn't ready last year. Now he's ready to grab the bull by the horns. It more feels like, from what they've been saying, yeah, we hope he gets there. But by signing Denzel Perryman back, by signing Troy Dye back, two guys who started for you at times last year and played capably, I thought at a pretty good level, especially for backup linebackers, we're not totally sold that he's ready to take it over yet. At least that's how I'm perceiving it from the outside looking in. But him starting next to Deion Henley and realizing what his potential is and finding his footing in this defense is the best case scenario. I like Denzel Perryman, especially early down short yardage stuff for sure, but he has flaws to his game. Troy Dye played out of his mind last year from at least the point where we thought we would expect from him, which is basically just a special teams player. Maybe he gets a little bit on the field defensively, but Junior Coulson was bad last year. It wasn't, just that he was out there and maybe he didn't get to be out there enough. It's that when he was out there in the 250 plus snaps that he played, he just wasn't in the right spot. He wasn't consistently making plays. He had a negative impact on the defense and actually allowed more big plays than it felt like he made big plays. So I'm not going to write him off. I'm not saying he's the next Kenneth Murray. Things can click. Things can slow down for you in year 2. Ask Deion Henley, right? Because he just had a huge leap. If they can get that leap and see it right now in training camp and be like, hey, he's where we wanted him to get to. Let's ride with these two dudes standing next to each other for basically the entirety of training camp and in any preseason game if we want to play them there. That's the best case for this defense. But let's talk about another 2024 draft pick who has a bunch to prove, and that's Justin Eboigbe, who, unlike Junior Coulson, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. When you play at more snaps like Junior Coulson did, even though 250 isn't many, you get at least a decent sample size of what someone can do. We have no sample size on Justin Eboigbe. It was 26 defensive snaps. And when you're playing defensive line, a position that's not going to be as valuable to you on special teams, right? Scott Matlock plays some special teams, but obviously certain positions, you're not going to be a defensive lineman playing special teams. Whereas a linebacker can catch on as basically only a special teams guy. Harder to do that as a defensive lineman. And for Justin Eboigbe, we've heard the coaches say the right things, right? He was a tweener coming out of college where he wasn't really a full-time defensive tackle. He wasn't really a full-time edge rusher. And size-wise, he was somewhere in between. Now he's fully committed to being a defensive tackle. He's gained 20 pounds of muscle during the offseason, according to Jesse Minter, which is nice. I mean, it means physically he should be much more ready to go this year. But he has to prove it. And that's a huge thing. And I think especially when you're talking about a room that doesn't really have that alpha male, that one elite guy, or even just elite talent in front of him, he has a great chance to eat into some snaps. I mean, the Chargers use a defensive rotation anyways, but he's going to have every chance to go prove that he should be a big part of this defense. Where last year, he was a healthy scratch in most games. Like, that just is what it is. And if you're a defensive lineman, as much as you want to let them develop, you can't keep a guy on a roster, 2 or 3 years if he's not being able to get on the field and do something for you defensively. So I know they're developing him. Everyone develops at their own pace, but at that specific position, if he goes through this season with the amount of healthy scratches that he had last season, it's hard to imagine that he'll be around even in 2026. So it starts in training camp. It starts with the pads come on with the defensive lineman specifically when you can show that physicality. He was a very physical player at Alabama in his time there, an all SEC player in his time there. And I think, put up 6.5 sacks his senior season. So he has some pass rush chops. If he can be a pass rusher on the interior of this defensive line, one of the biggest question marks we have about this defensive line going into the year, that's going to be a way he could get himself a lot of snaps. You lost Morgan Fox. You lost Poona Ford, your 2 top pressure guys on the inside. You need someone to fill that void. And if Justin Eboigbe can be that, if he can say, I'm the guy that's actually the kind of the pass rush specialist, that's a great way for him to get on the field and play a ton defensively in 2025. But he is one of the biggest X factors and kind of just one of the biggest wild cards going into the training camp this season, not knowing kind of what to expect from him. But unlike the rest of the guys I've talked about, these guys I'm going to talk about here are rookies. I tried to stay away from rookies for the most part, but the next guys I have with the most to prove going into training camp are rookies Jamaree Caldwell and Kyle Kennard. The Chargers did not make any splashes defensively, in my opinion. Dante Jackson, sure, right? Not a huge one there. You lost out on Poona Ford. You lost Joey Bosa to the Bills, which we all kind of expected to happen. But as far as the big improvements you're going to make, you're going to have to look to those rookies to bring you something that you didn't necessarily have last year. And you have 2 rookies on your defensive front that are going to have to use training camp to show that they should be part of this defense, or at least maybe show that they earned bigger roles on this defense than what they have right now. Jamaree Collier and Kyle Kennard. Same thing with Justin Eboigbe. Jamaree Caldwell has a clear path to playing time. There's nobody ahead of him where you say that person is unimpeachable. T.R. Tart, Deshaun Hand, Naquan Jones, none of those guys are unimpeachable. But you're going to have to battle those vets out and show you should be taking snaps away from those guys who they went and handpicked in free agency before they knew they were going to have you. And then in the case of Kyle Kennard, you're going up, and unlike with Jamaree Caldwell, who's going up against vets, but not big name vets, you're talking about a guy in Khalil Mack that 2 years ago had 17 sacks, and the guy in Tuli Tuipulotu that led the Chargers in sacks last season. Those are who Kyle Kennard's trying to go through. Now, there is a rotation, and he will get some snaps as a rookie. They're also going to need him to play some special teams as a rookie and pick up some of the slack of where you're hoping Tuli Tuipulotu isn't getting those snaps on special teams this year. Hopefully, Kyle Kennard can take a big part of those over. But with Kyle Kennard, we're going to know something early, or we could at least know something early, because he's going to have a chance to go one-on-one with Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt at training camp. So everyone talks about iron sharpen iron, and maybe that's something that gets overused and thrown around too much these days. But man, when you get those 2 dudes to kind of test your mettle against, and those 2 dudes to help you kind of make the transition to the NFL level, man, if he goes out there and, wins 2 out of 4 of his pass rush snaps against, those guys in the first few days of padded practices, that's going to show us something. So it's great to know that you have guys that can actually push guys like that. Now, like if Jamaree Caldwell starts wrecking shop against Zion Johnson and Bradley Bozeman, it's going to be hard to know, okay, was that actually Jamaree Caldwell is really good, or is he just picking on, the biggest question mark we have on this team? You don't have to think about that with Kyle Kennard because he's going to get some reps against the Chargers' best and 2 tackles, maybe, the second best tackle duo going into the NFL this season behind Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata. You're going to have those guys to test yourself against. So we could know really early if Kyle Kennard has the juice and the ability to get on the field early and make an impact in his rookie season. And maybe, with the Chargers pass rush questions, maybe they need him to be that, right? Because their pass rush efficiency-wise was not great last year. They could use some more juice. So if you could get legitimate pass rush from Khalil Mack and Thule, and Kyle Kennard can eat into that in training camp in the preseason and show that he belongs, that could be, really mean big things for a guy with Jesse Minter, where he can elevate guys who aren't even thought to really have a ton of talent or bring them back to where they were. What can he extract out of this guy? Because we know he has some juice. We know he can turn the corner. We know he had the most sacks in the SEC last season. That guy shows what he can do early on. Man, Jesse Minter has another weapon at his disposal, and you start thinking about NASCAR packages with him and Thule and Khalil Mack all on the field at the same time on a 3rd and long with Derwin James in the slot and, ball hawks like Elijah Molden and Tarheeb still in the backfield getting ready if you do have to rush that pass to potentially jump one and take it back to the house. That's something that gets you excited, but big question marks because the big improvements on this defense might have to come from the rookies because they didn't add a ton on that side of the football. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Again, thank you for those who stuck it out with me after David had an unfortunate internet situation. We are committed to bringing you guys all the shows we say we are going to. And the great news is the offseason for us is over. Next week, back to 5 episodes a week in actual training camp to talk about. Live shows next week to break down the training camp practices that happen. We are so excited about that. But on Monday, make sure you're back here as we break down all of the offensive camp battles we're most excited to see. But to make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from, as well as finding us on all of our social media, like at Locked On LAC on Twitter, where we post the show every day, as well as at Locked On Chargers on Instagram and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page as well. If you want to get on the next fan show, you can also hit us up on all of those social media platforms and call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924 and leave us your 30-second Chargers question. But man, we got training camp next week. We have jersey reveals next week on July 15th. Make sure you guys are subscribing and following because you're not going to want to miss those shows or big shows like today where you find out that Najee Harris had an accident with the Firework. But thank you guys as always. We will make sure it's your team every day from here till the end of football season, plus because we're back to 5 shows a week next week. But make sure you guys are back for Monday's training camp battles. Until then, take it easy and go Bolts.